You are listening to the Rooted Path Global Podcast. This is the podcast for faith leaders, community developers, funders, and field practitioners who believe that formation must come before mission. The Rooted Path is a 9-step congregational formation framework built on one conviction. What is formed is what gets scaled. Beneath the framework sits clear path intelligence, the technology layer designed to hold what formation reveals long enough for it to mature into infrastructure. Because the field has had theology, it has had methodology. What it has never had is a system to hold its memory. The companion book is now available on Amazon. Divine Assets, Faith-Based Leadership for a Global Movement. This is not a program. This is not a curriculum. This is the operating system the field has been missing. Formation before mission. Let us begin.
The erasure machine continues on what disappears when the word disappears first. I read the comment section before I read the rolling. That's usually where the real story is. Not in the legal opinion, not in the press release, in the space underneath it, where people say the quiet part first. Some were celebrating, some were bracing. Both were watching the same sentence and seeing something completely different disappear. In The Ones Who Stayed, I named this machine working at 2 levels at once. By machine, I don't mean a secret organization. I mean a recurring institutional pattern in which changing language precedes changing outcomes. At the state level, Florida's 2023 African American History Standards, still the standards taught in classrooms today, include language asking students to find personal benefit in slavery, and language framing the Tulsa Massacre as violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. At the federal level, the EEOC under Chair Andrea Lucas has invited white men to file discrimination claims, sued Nike, Coca-Cola, and the New York Times over diversity programs, and stated outright that there is no such thing as reverse discrimination, a framing that erases the difference between a program built to correct historical exclusion and the exclusion itself. These stories are different, legally, politically, and institutionally. What connects them is not ideology, it is sequence. I am going to keep showing you that sequence this month on purpose. Once you see the law of formation operate once, you start seeing it everywhere it is actually operating. This is the second time. It will not be the last. Here is what happened this week, and it illustrates the same mechanism operating at both levels again. It runs at the state level too, in a different state, on a different program, using the same word. This week, Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita issued a legal opinion declaring the state's minority and women's business enterprises certification standards unconstitutional. Governor Mike Braun acted on it immediately, discontinuing the program's race and sex-based contracting preferences and replacing them with what his administration is calling a merit-based system. A formal certification that said, on paper, this business belongs to someone the state has historically made it harder to see is gone.
But this did not happen this week. This week is only when it became visible. 18 months earlier, Braun signed an executive order barring diversity programs from executive agencies. Last August, the state quietly canceled its own annual business conference and expo, the actual venue where minority contractors built the relationships that won them work, and began requiring every state contractor to certify it had no diversity practices at all. Last September, Rokita led a 17-state coalition pressuring the federal government to let Indiana drop race and gender criteria from federally funded contracts. Each step was small enough to survive on its own. Together, they were never anything but a staircase, and this week was simply the top of it.
I have traced this same law elsewhere this week, in a piece landing separately, about a movement that spent 50 years building formation before it ever moved on mission. The movements are not the same. The mechanism is. Formation completed quietly, while attention is elsewhere. Mission executed the moment the final piece is in place. Whatever you think of either movement, that is not an opinion. That is how the law of formation works, every time. The argument for removing the MWBE certification is reasonable sounding. Neutral is fairer than named. Merit is fairer than memory. I don't think that argument is dishonest. I think it is incomplete. A rule that treats everyone the same only produces a fair outcome if everyone arrived at the starting line the same way. Let me repeat that again and let you sit with it for just a second. A rule that treats everyone the same only produces a fair outcome if everyone arrived at the starting line the same way. This is a very important distinction because it is the only part of the argument anyone ever skips. Access to capital,
access to networks, a contracting history long enough to bid competitively. None of that gets rebuilt by removing a certification. The certification was never intended to be the advantage. It was intended to make an existing disadvantage visible inside the contracting process. I have sat on the other side of this process too, approving contracts inside a corporate role, and I have seen it gamed. A company built and run by a man with his wife listed as the principal on paper, so the certification checks a box. The process was never actually testing in the first place. That failure is real. I am not going to pretend it isn't, because I stand on telling the truth about what I have actually seen, not just the truth that is convenient for the argument I am making. But a program being gamed by people determined to game it is not an argument for removing the only mechanism that was tracking the gap. It is an argument for enforcing it better. Delete the certification and the fraud disappears along with the protection. That is not a fix. That is giving up on both problems at once. That same week, Governor Braun's new Commerce Secretary Chuck Goodrich announced he would remain CEO of Gaylor Electric, his private company, while overseeing the very agency that grants Gaylor's state tax incentives and contracts. Gaylor Electric currently holds more than $1.3 million in economic development for growing economy tax credits and $200,000 in Hoosier business investment credits, plus active state contracts including work at the State House. The safeguard offered was not removal of the conflict, it was an internal screening process. These are not the same kind of question. The MWBE ruling is constitutional and policy. The Goodrich decision is governance and ethics. What unites them is not the legal category, it is the same institutional trust, asked to stretch in opposite directions depending on who needs it to. Sit those two decisions next to each other. One group loses a written protection because the state says it can be trusted to be fair without one. One official keeps an active financial conflict because the state says it can be trusted to manage it internally. Same trust, doing two different jobs, depending on who is asking for it. This is the same machine I named in The Ones Who Stayed. It doesn't always come as a wall or a door closing. Sometimes it comes as a certification being taken out of one sentence and quietly protected inside another. And the people underneath it still split the same way they always have. Some will stay in the system as it now is and outcompete it anyway, refusing to let the removal of a name become the removal of their place. Some will leave the table the state built and build their own. One refuses to let them call it fair, the other refuses to wait for it to become fair. Both are real. Both are costly. Both are resistance. Formation doesn't ask which side of that you're on. It asks a harder question. Whoever rewrote the rule, did they do the work of closing the gap first? Or did they just remove the word describing it and keep the door open for themselves? That's the test, not the ruling, the gap.
Thank you for spending time with me. If this conversation moves something in you, share it with someone doing the work alongside you. I'm Damian Curd, still operating on the oldest theology in the room. Love thy neighbor. Until we meet again, stay rooted, my friends.